Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. And today we're joined by Think Project, and I'm going to introduce you to Bruce and Valerie in a moment. And today's webinar, we're looking at how to configure your contract data to drive success like a well-tuned car. So looking forward to hearing about that very shortly. Before we go on, just in case you've not joined us before on these webinars, I wanted to basically let you know that you can get involved and ask questions. We'd like as many questions as possible. Bruce and Valerie will be able to answer those at the end. And you can speak to us as well. So basically, you can type your questions in the question box on your menu, or you can raise a hand and we can turn on your microphone at the end and speak to us. We probably prefer the latter, so that, do get involved. We've also got some polls that will be running through this webinar as well. So, it'd be great if you could keep an eye out for those and vote on those as well, so we can really get a feel for what your guys' thoughts are on the various topics we've got today. So, on to introduce our speakers today. And Valerie, who's joined us before, has spent 15 years on a variety of projects within the construction sector, UK and international, and has worked on mega projects from Crossrail to Tideway Tunnel, and has industry expertise and insights around contract and commercial management to assist the Think project team with industry knowledge and scale of the sales process. And we're also joined by Bruce. Bruce has worked in the industry for 25 years as a quantity surveyor and has worked on other major projects as well, including Hinkley Point C, and was responsible for the implementation of the contracts management system there. So we've got some great experience with both Bruce and Valerie. And with that, I'm going to hand over to you both to present. So bear with me a second while I do that. And as I say, we'll come back to you at the end for Q&A, and obviously look forward to doing that. And we've got the polls on the way. So thanks, guys, and over to you.
Thank you, Nathan. Thanks so much. Right, so I'm going to introduce the agenda for today, because we actually sat down with Bruce a couple of months ago, and we like those discussions about how things work in our industry. And we thought that it would be good to have a bit of in-depth discussion about not just about obligations and the various types of contracts and reporting, but also why we actually need to have this sophisticated reporting these days, what is driving that. And I think we wanted to go back into the purpose and into the idea of how contracts in construction are being generated, what provisions they contain, what types of contracts available, what is actually what are specifics of those contracts which driving the need in sophisticated reporting we have these days. And I think what we scheduled out is we talked about analogies, we talked about analogies with the car industry, and I think purposely, again, we thought about the fact that the car industry is is probably more efficient than construction, so we must admit we're not working in the most efficient industry with regards to the performance. And we wanted to draw those analogies, not just because we wanted to understand better how the contracts can be delivered and what ideas we can gather from reporting which may improve the delivery in construction, but we also wanted in general to brainstorm and put it in, from perspective of comparing it to the automobile industry. We actually wanted to break it down into more chewable chunks for everyone, so you have a bit of structure in your head, and you walk away from this webinar thinking that you probably understand why we're doing things in a certain way, right? So bearing that in mind, so we put this agenda together. So we're going to talk about the purpose of construction contract. We're going to talk about what actually do you do to manage this contract in terms of maintenance, and we compare that to the car again. Then we talked about type of these contracts, and I think Bruce came up with some excellent analogies. Why do you actually drive different types of cars? Why do you have different types of procurement process in place before you approach your lawyers, and you work with them on the type of contract you're generating. And also specification, I think, is crucially important. So we know that these days we are probably not going to drive petrol or diesel vehicles in maybe a decade of time, or maybe even earlier. How we prepare ourselves for that, so what needs to be done and why there is a difference needs to be made. And also when we're going to go into detail of discussing analytics and reporting on construction projects, there are various options available, and I think it's important to actually talk about those options, because it may be suitable for one contractor, one client, and maybe it's quite extortionate for another one. So you don't actually need that, and you probably over designing and over engineering your process just because you're looking at someone else. And I think, yeah, that's sort of broadly our agenda. So Bruce, do you have anything to add?
No, I mean, other than that, the fact that I've thoroughly enjoyed coming up with analogies and comparing cars and contracts. I think it puts it in a perspective that everyone can understand, even if you're not a contract expert. If you assimilate that to things that we all do, which is buying a car and having to maintain it, making those decisions, and it just trying to brick draw those analogies with contracts makes it a little bit more understandable, hopefully. So first poll for us to go through. I suppose if I think back to sort of when I started in construction and how we reported on a construction project, it was all, lever arch files with handwritten information that we then had to try and extrapolate. I suppose the question we've got for everyone now is as we've moved to a more digitized industry, and we are lagging behind the rest of the industries, do you use a digital platform or tool for your reporting? Do you use a Power BI? Do you use the in-house reporting that you have within your systems that help you manage your construction project? So really that was the first poll, and I think I'll hand it back to Nathan to bring that one up for you guys to answer.
Yeah, so that you can vote. Sorry, voting away. So we've got about half our audience have voted. So if a few more people could vote, and then we'll close that and give you the result. Okay, so we're coming up to 60%. So we get a couple more seconds.
The rest of the people hopefully doing some sort of reporting if we're not getting responses from. Yeah, but I think we have a range of different options in the poll. So if you could choose the closest to kind of the idea of your reporting, would be interesting to see.
Cool. Okay, I think everyone's voted now, so I'm going to close that one and share the result.
Yeah, that's great.
There you go. Can you see that? So you've got 46% of people saying they're using standard built-in, 22% don't use any reporting, and 32% using Power BI. Okay,
so that's probably near what we expected, I think. A lot of people do use that in-app standard reporting that comes with the systems. I think we'll talk through sort of some of the ideas of what metrics we should be looking at when you're reporting on contract data and the like. And then also how you can start to connect up that data, whether you're using the in-app stuff or whether you're using the Power BI and the data share stuff. So.
Absolutely, I think it's actually probably not unexpected, because we, again, after I spent a number of years working on construction site, I still observe quite a lot of reporting being done in Excel spreadsheets, let alone pieces of paper flying around the office and construction sites cabins. I mean, it's difficult. I think it's more cultural shift as well, and it's inevitably going to be a very slow process. But I think, again, going back into the car analogy, thinking about how we have sophisticated databases managing information for us these days. We may still hold some tickets and pieces of paper, but everything is still nevertheless duplicated in some sort of system, which is which is purposely done for monitoring and consistency. Can everyone see our screen? So if I go to the next slide.
Yeah, it's all good.
Lovely. Okay, thank you. So yeah, stopping on the first point, and I think we said that we want to go back and look at construction contracts and actually understand the purpose of construction contract, because again, drawing that analogy, we're trying to get from A to B with the car, and we're doing those journeys. We're going somewhere every single day, and the purpose of the the vehicle, right? So any car you may own is actually to get from A to B as such, as simple as that. Same for the construction contract. So we simply trying to fulfill all obligations. Sometimes they're being, seen as something overly complicated and not necessarily we use all provisions we have in those contracts. But nevertheless, again, they exist as legally binding agreements between two parties, as simple as that, right? So we're looking at A to B, we're looking at the client and contractor, and that's what is connecting both parties. I think, again, it's interesting. I think I was thinking about it the other day. Verbal contracts in the UK are also legally binding, right? And we still observe this probably day to day. Why, in your view, Bruce, you think we still have those sophisticated contracts in construction? So why should we go for written contracts, which sometimes again containing too many provisions we actually don't use it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's to do with the clarity. So I mean, I was listening to a podcast this morning around entire clause agreement or entire agreement clauses, and actually making sure that everything is within the contract. Everyone understands the obligations. I mean, that's the key thing about any contract. Contracts can become very complicated. The moment one party doesn't understand their obligations, that tends to be where you have problems, have disputes. So trying to make them as clear and precise as possible, so that you can then have a simple mechanism to manage those legal obligations.
Yeah, I think that's my consideration as well. I'm actually bearing that in mind. Again, drawing that analogy, I actually thought the other day, and I probably schedule out 5 different components of construction contract. And in fact, it can apply to any contract, but I think with regards to the construction contract, I thought about defining project scope. It's the body of the car, so you can't get away without any project scope. Establishing terms and conditions, are these the wheels of the vehicle? And I'll cover all of this. So steering wheel is how we work around project risk. So are we actually turning to the left or to the right? Are we allocating too much risk to a contractor or a client? And that is very important consideration. Thinking about legal compliance, it really becomes your seatbelt. So you have that protection in place. You have to make sure that you're using it consistently, and therefore that is something fundamentally important in every single contract. And then actually thinking about the seatbelt, we still have airbags, but we don't have it in every single vehicle. You probably look at the old-fashioned vehicles, you won't have airbags in there. And therefore I compared airbags to, or put the analogy with the dispute resolution provisions. In the modern contracts, every single modern contract will probably contain ADR provisions, and they will have something in place where you may not necessarily end up using it in the end, but you have that provision to feel more comfortable. You have that provision to make sure that if you've done everything possible, but you still haven't managed to mitigate all the risk, you have that provision in place instead of relying on your governing law to deal with your disputes. So I think these are kind of things as scheduled, and maybe we can talk about a few of this. I think I quite like, personally, if I may start, I quite like that steering wheel, which I compare to project risk. So what's your observation? Because again, procurement process will dictate how you allocate your risks.
Absolutely, and I mean, we used to have a phrase on Hinkley, our commercial director coined it, was, there's no such thing as a client passing the risks off onto contractors. You don't, it's a misnomer to believe that as a client you can put the risk onto the contractor, because the adverse effects of a poor project or not delivering a project on time are far outweigh, particularly if you look at a major project like Hinkley, the notch generating electricity for EDF is a massive impact compared to the impact that the contractors would feel for late delivery. So I think it's being sensible around risk. I think a lot of the modern contracts now put risk where it best sits to be managed, and I think that's the ethos that, you know, as you move forward and you develop your contracting strategies, it's looking at the risks, saying where are they best managed, and then allocating them appropriately. So I think that for me is, I think you're right. I think, you know, that management of risk, every contract has risk in it, every construction project has inherent risks in it. Understanding those and then managing them properly, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's inevitable that the way, I mean, why we talk about it as a first step and as a basis of every contract is you may have all those provisions in place, but again, the way you may manage your contract in the most effective way, but the way it's been designed to start with is largely going to dictate the success or failure of your project, because sometimes it's absolutely impossible. But again, I have a plethora of different examples from my career as well, where, you know, you just absolutely have no way of managing the risk which has been allocated to you, because effectively it shouldn't been done like that in the first place, and it's just becoming a burden of, and that is leading to generation of disputes, whether that's informal disputes to start with or a more formal type of dispute. I think I want to talk about this legal compliance as well, because this is largely what is also, it can be managed through the effective contract management. But in the first place, how do you ensure that you have all those legal requirements being built? You take into consideration your jurisdictional law, you take into consideration the type of project and the procurement model as well. So what's your view on that again, Bruce?
I think that, as you said, that there's a large part that you can go by using some of the standard forms that are out there nowadays. I think they give a structure to it. They've been through a lot of the thought processes. So if you read the new versions of the FIDIC, the NEC4s, they have done a lot of that thinking for you. So, you know, I would always say, you know, you start with that template. Never try and start writing a contract from scratch. It's far too difficult. And they've done a lot of that hard work for you with industry experience. So actually taking those standard forms and utilizing them, I think it would always be my recommendation.
And I can't agree more. I think, yeah, when you start messing around with terms and conditions and amending something without, you know, a context of the overall contract, I think it can be a recipe for disaster as well.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you have to be cognizant, and you said it, that, you know, there may be situations where you take a standard form and let's say a period for a response is 7 days, and the nature of the project you're on might mean that can't be responded to for 28 days because you've got a large design team, there's lots of things that it needs to go through. I think having the recognition at the early stages and making those adjustments when you're formulating your contract is really key, because there's no point in signing a contract where you know you can't meet the obligations that are stated in it. So making sure that you've got those so that you can then effectively manage it, monitor it, going forward.
Yeah, making sure you don't need to use your airbag, which is a dispute resolution provisions. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, well, I think that's the basis, and this is that kind of first part of the conversation where we just, you know, we're trying to establish some criteria of successful procurement and designing of your contract, which is crucially important for success. And I think, talking about that and moving on, what do we do in terms of, yes, we now purchased the car, we have a beautiful car, we designed it, we thought about every single provision, how it should work, we've got the wheels and airbags and belts and everything, but what happens next, right? So you can buy the vehicle and in a couple of years time it becomes, you know, not efficient, maybe you haven't maintained it, maybe it requires some you know, repair and modernization, and if it hasn't been done, so then you are also in trouble, right? And that's probably the next.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm a great believer that your contract management. A lot of people term contract management as the renewal of a contract. I'm a great believer that the hard work begins when you sign the contract. Yes, the procurement process is important to make sure you've got the right thing to sign up to, but actually the majority of the work is done during that phase of post-signature. So I think, as we do with our cars, you get them regularly serviced, you get the brakes checked, you get the oil checked. All of those things need to happen, and it's exactly the same with the contract. If you just let a contract sit in a drawer, much like let a car sit on the driveway, it will rot and it will not work properly.
Absolutely. Even cleaning it, even making sure that you know.
Absolutely.
You always feel embarrassed when you have a child and you have a car which is not necessarily looking to the standard. But what I was trying to establish here as well, I sat down and I think we talked about it, we brainstormed a little bit, and there are six aspects again. So maybe feel free to comment and send us some suggestions as well if you see there's something else which we're missing here. But again, so I thought that cost control is the first thing, right? So when we talk about maintenance and management of our contracts, cost control is crucially important. So are we actually aligned with regards to our expectations, how much driving this car is going to cost us? You have to monitor that. So you may buy an expensive car with, ridiculously large engine and start spending enormous amount of money on that. So is this something what you envisage to have, or do you need to sell it? Do you need to somehow mitigate that cost control or take that cost control impact into consideration? I think that is very, very important aspect. So next one is risk mitigation. So again, we talked about risk allocation when we procure contracts, but talking about risk allocation is, again, this is just the factor. Some projects can have very unfair risk allocation, but they still manage to mitigate the impact on each party and really achieve successful delivery of the project without any dispute. Again, I do compare that to MOT and regular service of your car. How often you look at your risk and you think about mitigation measures, how often you discuss those mitigations in the open meeting with your other party.
Although I would argue that an MOT you only do once a year, your risk reduction measures should be much more regular than that.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
But I think you're right. I think it's almost that, before you do a long journey, you should check your vehicle. So you should check your oil, your tyre pressures and things. It's the same thing with your risk. That should be a weekly process. Before you get in the car, you check it over to make sure that it's safe to drive. But the risk mitigation is that active.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely spot on, because it can be more formal, which is servicing your MOT. It can be more informal, such as getting into your vehicle and actually asking yourself a question. So am I able to drive it today safely?
Or can you hear a knocking when you're driving along? It's those sorts of things that you would raise that as a risk, or it might be a problem with the tyres, and you then look to mitigate it, take it to someone to look at, check it, whether it needs anything doing to resolve it. So
Yes. So in terms of project delivery as well, again, maybe you have better analogy, but I was just thinking about key dates, thinking about completion dates, that project delivery element and that indicator of, are you on track, right? And this is again something to do with, do we know when the next formal servicing is due? Do we know when we need to submit certain information on the contract, that we are not effectively running late and we're not missing probably contractual deadlines and therefore entitlement for certain events such as change and risk management as well.
Well, it's a large part of the benefits of using a product like CEMAR is that much the same way as when you're driving along, your car gives you a little warning that says you need a new service in the next sort of 10,000 miles or whatever it may be. You have those same sorts of hints that come up with this.
In project reminders, absolutely.
To say, you've got to do this within 7 days, you've got to respond to this. So it helps you have that engagement.
Yeah, and that's absolutely spot on, because you're absolutely right. In our contract management software, we have that indicator, and it is quite clearly defining your role and your obligations under the contract, and also indicating the time frames for each type of event. Again, quality assurance, so do we have appropriate risk and repair and maintenance? How do we look at the technical queries, RFIs, and anything we're raising on the project? Again, so it is important. It sometimes being seen as a minor element of, or people think about contract management when they are sitting in the QS seat or project manager seat. They're not necessarily looking at this nitty-gritty stuff. It's quite difficult to keep an eye on it, right? To make sure that everything is submitted on time. You know, there might be smaller communications going in that direction, and it's difficult to ensure that you keep an eye on those as well. So I also like stakeholder alignment, so which I actually compare this to sharing your car with family members or with someone you probably sharing your car on a daily basis. Are you communicating effectively? Do you know that I've taken the car today and Bruce has to walk or take public transport? Again, so how those communications are being managed, how do you do that on a daily basis? Again, this is largely done. We don't have, it's not a silver bullet, right? So I would probably assume that we communicate some information on the project via email, via phone calls. We talked about verbal contracts. Quite often people pick up the phone and talk to you about something, and they assume that you remember that it needs to be done. Again, with the contract management software, you can have all of this in the same place, which makes your life, yes, much easier. Place. Yeah. And the last, nevertheless, not least, it's legal protection. Are we keeping records of everything we're doing? So thinking about selling this vehicle tomorrow, do you have every single I don't know, confirmation of MOT servicing, maybe some repairs you've done on your car in the same place, or you sporadically trying to collect it last minute. I think these are kind of anything else I might have missed, Bruce, or anything you want?
No, I think you've hit it bang on. I think it's that regular, checking of the vehicle, checking in on it. And it's exactly the same, for your contract is that constant attention to, what it needs to help you continue to sort of have a good.
And that is what contract management is about. It's not about looking at the fact that you said some addendums or renewals or anything like that. It's day-to-day work on making sure that your contract is success, regardless how beautiful it looks at the start when you're just establishing it. I think that's very important. I think bearing that in mind, we come into the next part of kind of cascading down from procurement model, where we are with considerations related to the contract management. So how about the type of the vehicle? Because I was just thinking it also is crucially important, right?
Yeah, well, I think, so I've been thinking on this one, and, it was very much around sort of getting into the detailed purpose of, so we've got the high level purpose of what a contract on the car is, or a vehicle, let's say. It's a vehicle to get you to A to B. The purpose of a contract is to manage those legal obligations. I think when we get into the detailed purpose, and if you think about a car, what do you want your car to do? Do you want it to carry you and your family? Is it a works vehicle? Is it a van that you need to take tools in? So the considerations when you're then selecting the car that you want are based around the detailed purpose of what you want to do with that car. And contracts are very much the same. So, what are we buying? Are we buying goods? Are we buying goods? Are we buying services? Or are we buying works? And depending on the form of contract, it changes what data and what metrics you should be looking at. So, on a goods contract, things like, is it X works? So, and are there factory acceptance tests that have to be carried out before the goods are delivered to site? Those are then the metrics that you want to be analysing and assessing. Whereas if it's a services contract, it's more about provision of documentation and designs and the acceptance of a design. So each, dependent on what you're selecting, and it's exactly the same goes for cars, Am I carrying tools? What's the important thing? The detailed purpose is I need a big load space for this car, and then you assess based on the load space. And it would be the same thing with a contract. You know, I'm buying goods. What tests do I need? Am I paying for it as it comes out of the factory? Are they delivering it? Who's responsible for the delivery of the goods? Those sorts of considerations drive what sorts of data that you want to look at going forward. So that was really the analogy that I had around this piece, but it's just that understanding of what you're buying and then understanding the data and the terms that sit below it that you then want to be able to analyze and assess to be able to manage it.
Because how difficult it can be if as part of this, I mean, it's part of procurement, I guess, still, but how difficult it is sometimes if you have an appropriate type of contract to gather the right data, because it can be absolutely impossible sometimes if you're thinking about the wrong type of contract being selected, such as it could be, I don't know, it could be not engineering contract you want to select, it might be something else, right? And it might be a professional service, it might be a term service contract. It is that largely is going to dictate what sort of data you're going to get out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are, you know, if you go into the specifics and the real detailed purpose of contract, you know, I've worked previously in the rail industry. There are very specific clauses around signaling systems and mean time between failure tests, which is a very different testing regime to any other form of contract that you're going to get into, other than sort of mechanical plants. And so, you know, understanding that requirement and then how you're going to measure it, how you're going to monitor it, and how you're going to manage it is really, really important. So as you've said before, this is just taking you through those levels of what we need to start considering when we're configuring the contracts, deciding which contracts we want, and deciding how we're going to report on them. Having that understanding of what you're buying is really, really good.
And again, with customization of the solution we have, we can achieve that. Because absolutely, as you rightly pointed out, if you have specific provisions just valid for your contract, we can make sure that they are part of the software version you receive. And
I think it's what we've tried to do with all the analytics stuff is broadly most of these things fit into some categories. So they fit into and you'll come on to talk about it, but you know, that cost, risk, time, quality triangle. There's more than three there, so it can't be a triangle. But those critical success factors to a project, those are the things that really we try and bring it all together under those auspices.
Okay, should we move on to the last one? Because I think it's also very important. I think, again, the very interesting analogy, Bruce.
Yeah, this is my favourite one, and I needed to be a little bit careful about how I termed this one. But I suppose for me, it's very much the difference between the old traditional forms of contract that we have and the newer, more collaborative forms of contract. Now, you can see that most forms are developing into a much more collaborative way of doing business. The NEC's a very collaborative form. The FIDIC has, in the updated version in 2017, has become much more collaborative. And I think we're seeing that across lots of industry standards, the PPC contracts that are being released, you know, those are all much more collaborative type contracts. And if you were thinking about, you know, diesel, petrol, fossil fuels versus electric, you know, maybe, yes, we do still have some of these old traditional adversarial type contracts, but I think most people within the industry recognize that collaborative contracting, working together for the best outcomes of the project, is probably the best way.
And I think that's that gradual change we're going to probably see. Again, another analogy we discussed the other day, I think, was getting this, you know, new zones of regulation in London, for example, where you can't drive diesel vehicles anymore in certain parts.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think you're spot on. That exactly that. You know, in the same way as we've got new regulations around the type of fuel we can use in our car, we've got new regulations that come into the contract. So the Housing Grants Regeneration Act was a payment act that's in all UK government or UK contracts now, because that was all around fair payment. It was about ensuring people get paid appropriately on time. And so what we're seeing is a lot of the contracts adopting this, and they're being influenced by the legislation that's coming out, the regulations that are coming out.
Payment charges and everything which fall, yeah.
Project bank accounts, you know, all of those sorts of things are starting to drive that. Now, you know, much in the same way as diesel and petrol cars, we still have those. And I think we will always have them. I think, you know, there's a place for a big, you know, 6-litre American muscle car that will always be there because someone will want to drive that and they won't want an electric version of it. So I think we will end up with traditional contracts in some form forever, but I think we'll see a greater transition between more and more people moving towards, you know, collaborative contracts, electric cars, because that's the right way to do it.
Perfect. I think that leads us to the next poll question we actually have, because we would like to understand, at some point we spoke with our clients before we released a new analytics in our contract management solution, and we talked to the clients about critical elements of the contract reporting. We really wanted to gather what is important to them, and I think we've got 5 different aspects of the project reporting. It would be good to see what the today's audience think about those 5 elements. I think there are 5. So we can share that what we gathered before with the existing pool of clients and what they've seen as for a couple of months ago as the most critical aspect of contract reporting and contract management.
Brilliant. So that poll is underway. So we've got about 30% have voted so far. So yeah, you've got cost management, risk management, schedule management, quality management, or collaboration. Okay, so coming up to halfway. We'll give it a couple more seconds.
Yeah, when we talk about collaboration here, we actually we touch on not just on communication aspect, but also compliance aspect. So how do you comply with specific terms of the contract and also time frames, especially with regards to NEC and FIDIC contracts.
Okay, so I'm going to close that there and share the results.
Sure, yeah.
So yeah, we've got a split 15% cost and risk, 13% schedule, 8% quality, and 49% collaboration. So yeah.
Love it. Yeah, I think that's it's interesting, to be honest. I think because people were focused on cost last time we ran this poll, and it's actually interesting to see this shift in the industry, right? So people started talking about collaboration and how they
makes me feel all warm inside, that one.
Yeah. Same, yeah. I think
that's a good thing.
It's a very good thing. I think it shows probably a bit of cultural shift, to be honest. So yeah, and that leads us to actually our final part of the webinar, where we're going to talk about how you can monitor and probably keep a track on those aspects of contract reporting. Again, as I said, so previously we had cost, risk, and communication. That was the order we gathered from our clients. Now it's interesting to see communication comes first. And as I said, in terms of communication through the dashboards we have in our contract management solution, CEMAR, you can gather a big deal on you can see that collaboration, in fact, and that's where communication is sitting as part of the reporting package. We're not doing great on that. That was done probably purposely.
It's a dummy environment.
Purposely, it's a dummy environment. It was done purposely. But what we'd like to see in that part, and actually what our dashboards indicate in that part, are you dealing with your events in a timely manner? If we have 3 weeks to submit a classation for a compensation event, are we actually submitting it within 3 weeks, or it takes us longer? We can also look at different aspects of project delivery. We can see different registers as well. So what stands out for you, Bruce, in terms of?
I think it's the communication settled on time. I mean, it's been our most used report, even in the old analytics, because it gives you a really good view of where you're able to communicate. And a lot of the time, it's not because of poor collaboration. It's because that, you know, for example, a compensation event might be a very complicated event that needs a lot of assessment. It needs some design team inputs. And I think collaboration comes down to that point of saying, well, we recognize this is going to take us longer to be able to quote on. So have that conversation early with the client. You can extend periods for reply, particularly under the NEC by mutual agreement. So, you know, have those conversations. Be proactive in your management, in your collaboration, because, you know, I've sat as both client and subcontractor and contractor, and, you know, there are times where you can't meet the timescales because of the complexity of the task you're being faced with. Everyone understands that, and it's just about being open and honest about it and collaborating to come to the right solution for the project. So I think, you know, and the other thing for me is when things get difficult on a contract, that's the true test of collaboration. Collaborating is easy when everything's going well and everyone's making money and the project's on time. Collaboration becomes more difficult when you get conflicts, where you have disputes. But that's where you really need to double.
And the fact it's been done instantly, right? So once you've responded to an event, the system automatically updates the analytics for you and shows you that you now have responded to this event, you're not late anymore, and it puts it, you know, from one pocket into another, and you can start seeing the difference, how proactively you can actually work in terms of collaboration. You can use a variety of reminders we talked about before, and also reporting on actual communications dealt with on time. Yeah. You can massively improve that, so you can see where your trend is not necessarily positive, yeah, where you're running constantly late on certain communications, and you can make a difference through maybe allocating this activity through the reminders to someone to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. Or you might not have enough people in your design team, or you might not have. So there are often triggering factors for why you're unable to deal with certain types of communication. You might not have a team of estimators available, or they may be busy on a tender. So there are reasons behind it. And so I think it's just having that understanding and being able to redeploy the resources when you need to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think cost is obviously self-explanatory more or less, but in terms of risk, for example, it's also one of my favorites, because in the risk part of the dashboard, you can see where you are with all your raised early warnings or advanced warnings and the FIDIC contract. Are you actually raising any proactive proposals to deal with that risk? And the dashboard straight away gives you that view. It gives you different sort of variety of charts to indicate how many risks have those proposals, when you last look at that risk, when you last discussed it, and what is the outcome. And in fact, you can also monitor how probability and severity of the risk is being impacted in the dashboard as well. I think, yeah, that the system is actually ticking every single box in terms of the needs of the project, and we welcome your questions as well. So if you have any specific question and you want to understand whether, you know, you can see that through the Power BI analytics we've got in CEMAR, please ask it in the chat and pop it up to Nathan's directly, but we're more than welcome to cover that. But I think, again, so this is one option which is perfect on its own. We have something else Bruce was going to also talk about.
So I mean, the way I've tried to explain this is that the sort of the CEMAR analytics that you can get within CEMAR is very much like the instrumentation that you would get in a car as a driver. So you have your fuel gauge, you'll have your speedometer, etc., etc. You have all these gauges that tell you information about, you know, your car, or in terms of CEMAR, you have CEMAR analytics, which give you lots of information about your contract, okay, and the contract data. I do need to be careful, because it's not contract data as everyone would understand from the NEC form of contract. We're talking about data that's generated from the management of your contract. So what we also have is we have this ability to connect to a data share. And the way I explain it is that, so if you think about a Formula One car and the drivers driving along, they have lots of sensors that show them information within the car. However, there's over 300 sensors on a Formula One car. Those are all feeding information back to their team in the pit lane, who are making adjustments. They're calling you know, the car's in for changing of tyres, etc., etc. So there's a whole load of statistics and data and sensor information that goes back to that reporting team. CEMAR is very much like that in that we have over 1,400 data points within our analytics and within our data share. So whereas with Formula One, they'll pull all this sensor information and they'll also combine that with maybe information about the quality of the fuel or the type of rubber that goes in the wheels. What we've started to do is we've started to bring together lots of systems. So we have a number of other solutions within our portfolio as Think Project. We have document management systems, we have field management systems. And so what we've realized is one of the big challenges clients face across the construction industry is, yes, they can get a great deal of contract data and contract reporting information out of CEMAR, but how does that relate to the other information that they hold within their other systems? So they probably have site management systems where the people, the guys and girls out on site are taking pictures of defects. How do they connect back to the contract information and the defects that are being raised under the contract, or, you know, the approval or submission of a design for acceptance? That comes through your document management tool. How do you link that to the design submissions under your contract? And then probably the big one that we're always getting asked for is, I certify a payment within my contract, but how do I then link that to the money actually going out of the bank from my finance system, my ERP system? So what we've started to do is, with this data share, we're able to offer the CEMAR contract data within a data lake, a Snowflake data lake. We've also got that for each of our other solutions as well. And so by doing this, and we've already got clients who are subscribing to this, you're able to then start to connect those disparate data systems together so that you can start to understand how they interact with each other. Now, important part of that is always going to be understanding the model of the system data. But, you know, that's something that we're already doing with our own products. But by having data share, it's enabling clients that if they use other solutions for their ERP, their finance system, or their field system, that they're able to connect those into this, and they can get a consolidated data lake so that they can then report across different multiple systems.
Okay, thank you. I think I've lost my slides a little bit. Nathan, if you can help, please, because I think we came to the point of the last, I think it's the last poll now. Show my screen. Let me just share it again. I think we're just going to share. I'm not entirely sure what happened here.
I'm seeing okay.
Oh yes.
Yep.
I think we come to the last poll. Well, obviously, Bruce talked about the customizable. Can you see our screen?
Yep, I'm ready for the poll. Yes.
Lovely, yeah. So I think Bruce, as you said, so we have this customizable option for actually making sure that you have a rich reporting, including not just CEMAR as contract management solution, but all other tools you may use as business. So what's your view on that? Would you use that if you had that option?
Okay, so we've launched that, and we've got 3 options there. Not interested in standard reporting is enough. I see the concrete value, and I'm interested. I need to identify use cases within my company. So we've got about 30% of people voted. So we'll give it a couple more seconds. And we've got some questions in. Oh, sorry, Bruce.
No, I was just going to say, the other thing to sort of bear in mind with that data share is very much like with the Formula One team. You need to have people who understand the data models of your other systems to be able to stitch that together. Now, the benefits of obviously coming to Think Project is we have our own solutions. We will stitch those together because we understand the data models inherent in them. We obviously don't have that knowledge of other systems. So, you know, if you are looking to connect multiple disparate systems and their data, you need to have a good understanding within your own organizations of what that data model looks like and how it relates and what the interrelationships are with your contract data.
Perfect. Okay, so we've got well, got about 60% of people. Give it a couple more seconds, and I'll close that and share the results with you. So you've got 15% not interested, standing report is enough. 53 see concrete value and are interested, and 32% need to identify uses within their company.
That's really good results. I'm really pleased, and I think it is such an interesting option for those who have that sophisticated way of reporting and using other systems as part of their day-to-day.
Yeah, I think it's encouraging, and I think it's encouraging that people recognise that, you know, we don't operate, and you know, I've managed contracts all my career. We don't operate in a silo. We have to work alongside all these other systems. We have to understand the impact of approvals in the document management system on the contract. So I think that, yeah, really encouraging.
I think, yeah, we've got 9 minutes left to take any questions, and if we have any questions from the audience.
We do, and so yeah, obviously type your questions, or I can come to you on your microphone. I've got first person I'm going to try and turn their microphone on is Deborah. So let's hopefully see if this works. Deborah, are you there? If you unmute your microphone. There you go. Hi, Deborah.
Hi, how's it going? Yeah, I just wondered, so we're in the sort of development process where we include a building operation system with the view of operating the building after closeout. I'm just wondering, like, have you seen many projects with this feature contractually, and what are the key considerations?
Yeah, really interesting. Yes, we do have some clients that we are already in discussion with. So we do have, as part of our suite of solutions, we have an asset management system which is used for all the highways out in New Zealand. So we are absolutely, and there's a couple of projects we're working elsewhere in Europe with how we can bring together all of these data systems. So they're using contract management, they're using document management, but ultimately all of that information, that project data, needs to get handed over into the asset management system, so that can be, it's part of that digital twin, it's part of the lifetime record of the asset, and it gets transposed as you're building the project. So as you deliver something and you provide the as-built, that would become part of that asset management. So we're in the process of doing it. It's, as you can probably imagine, it's quite a lengthy process, but we are working with some clients at the moment. But obviously it's very much dependent on what asset management solution they're using, or building an operation system they're using, and how they want to do that, run those sorts of integrations.
Mm. So can I follow up? Just quickly, ours is actually proprietary, so we build it in at the point of manufacture. So there's almost a kind of, you know, it needs to be a kind of an agreed clause of the contract negotiation. Yeah, so I was just wondering, like, yeah, what have you seen so far that's kind of helps get those contracts over the line?
Yeah, I mean, there does seem to be much more, and I think the NEC have brought out the design, build and operate contract. We're starting to see that get used more. I think it's still, personally, I think it's still quite in its infancy. There's not, you know, there is not sort of 20 years worth of case law sitting yet behind it with the precedents. But we are seeing definitely more of those design, build, operate type contracts that take it all the way through. So again, I suppose if you're formulating your contract and looking for the right clauses, I'd suggest, you know, having a look at some of those standard forms that are out there. I think the FIDIC have got a similar version to it as well, where you can try and get that sort of clausing in, so that you can make sure you've got the right references to ensure that you've got the data transfer between the systems.
Yeah, quite often clients also separate two contracts, so they deliver a project and then they get on another. But again, I guess my understanding, I don't know what is reasoning behind the procurement decisions in particular, but sometimes people just don't know different options. I think it's raising that awareness that we have new types of contracts, and we talked about it, making sure that we actually proactively thinking about this new and researching these new types of contracts, because otherwise we may not make other really dated contract obsolete in the industry, because you continue using those because you've always used them. I think that's very important consideration.
Cool. All right. I hope that's okay, Deborah.
Cool. Thank you.
Brilliant. And I've got a question from Katie, who has asked, is there any news when the quality aspect of the analytics will be available?
Yes, it should be in the next 4 to 6 weeks. There's just some additional data that we're bringing through to model, and then that should be all there for people.
Perfect. Okay. Got a question from Dan. I've unmuted you. See if you can unmute yourself, Dan. If not, I can ask your question. Dan Robert. Okay. I'm going to ask his question. Who picks up stitching the data together? Could that be costly to try and integrate multiple software systems and extremely complicated? Yeah.
I suppose yes. The simple answer is yes. It can be very costly. It can be very complicated. So part of what we offer as part of the data share package is we provide the full data model and our visualizations. So you would get straight away an understanding of the data and the data model from CEMAR. I think where it gets complicated, and we have experienced this with clients, is understanding how those other systems data relates to your contract data. Having been from industry, what I would suggest is the people involved in the construction project, so the project managers, the engineers, the quantity surveyors, will understand how that data relates to each other. I think what I often see is we involve very clever data scientists to stitch this all together, but they don't actually understand the meaning of the data, what it actually represents. So I think there is an effort between the data analysts and the reporting specialists within an organization, and then the people who actually understand the construction process and the construction project. And it's a joint effort between those two people. As a construction professional, I don't necessarily have the skill sets to build complicated data models in Power BI. However, I do understand the data, and I can explain that to the data analysts and the data scientists. So I think it can be very costly. Part of the reason why we're doing it as part of our sort of platform, as part of our offering with our solutions, is it takes that need for clients to do that away. We will already have done that thinking for you, but absolutely there is a piece that needs to be done in understanding what data is coming out of your systems, and we aren't necessarily the best people to do that for you.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Dan's also said, I guess it's very reliant on other software documentation and ability to connect.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we have a situation where all of our data comes out into a Snowflake data warehouse. You can connect Power BI direct to that with the relevant credentials. I cannot speak to what other software providers do and how they provide that data. But I think more and more there is a recognition that it needs to be offered in a format that is consumable by clients. So I wouldn't like to speak to other software vendors, but I think there's a recognition that getting data out is really key to clients.
Perfect. Good stuff. Well, we're literally coming up to the hour, and Dan says thanks. I've also got a message to pass on, Bruce, from Darren. Hello, Bruce, long time no see. So passing that one, I hope you know who Darren is, Darren Kuttner. So Hi, Darren. And yeah, this has been recorded as well. So everyone who's watching this, if you think anyone else can benefit from it, you can send them a link and they can watch it as well. Or you can watch it back. Obviously, we'll be putting you in contact with Bruce and Valerie as well if you want to share any more information or questions or anything like that. So thank you very much, Bruce and Valerie. That was really good, and lots of interaction and lots of voting and good feedback. So thank you for that. And I think we're going to be doing another Think Project webinar towards the middle to the end of June. So as soon as we've confirmed that date, we'll send an email out to all of you as well, so you can join us on that one as well. So thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Brilliant. And yeah, we'll see you soon.